Okay, so I want to talk about an issue that has been very dominant over the past decade and a half or so, and particularly in the last few months, that is Islamism, radical Islamism. Um, this has been something that has been brought up repeatedly, especially in the Republican presidential debates in the United States. It's, of course, a very topical issue in Europe as well. Um, I will weigh in a bit on it. Here in the UK, we've had a number of reports about violent attacks on Muslims after following the Paris atrocity. This include incidents of young Muslim women having their hijabs violently ripped off, elderly men being thrown off sub London Underground trains, this sort of thing. It's There's been quite a lot of these incidents, and I do think it's quite disturbing. I abhor any form of bigotry. I abhor any form of prejudice, and I will always, always, always condemn any incident of harassment or violence against a Muslim citizen minding their own business. Nobody should have to go through that. And it is right that the perpetrators are arrested and punished. Um, and it is disturbing that this seems to be on the rise. I would urge anyone who's been through this to report to the police. Don't let it go because this is something that cannot be tolerated. Nobody should live in fear of harassment or violence simply because of their faith or of the way of their appearance. There could be all the debates about integration and all of that, but still no excuse for terrorizing a fellow citizen. It's just not. Um, but there are other issues that need to be discussed here. So that's the first thing I want to make absolutely clear. I will always condemn that. Um, Regarding the Republican presidential debates, I a lot more. Obviously, I'm not an American, so I want to be careful the way I say this. But if I was an American, I'd probably find myself much, much more closely aligned to the Democrats, simply because I find myself in agreement with more of their positions overall. However, one area where I do agree with the Republican consensus on is this, and I think it was Ted Cruz mentioned it more than anyone. You have to call this ideology what it is: radical Islamism. And I do agree with Cruz that that's something the Obama administration hasn't been doing. They've been very politically correct about it. I guess the rationale is that it's good to polarize these people. Yeah, that's true, but you also have to call it what it is. Political correctness is not the way to go about this, nor is the Donald Trump approach, in my opinion, i.e., tarring all Muslims with one brush. I think that's ridiculous. I'd also point out that far more Americans have been killed in spree shootings than Islamist attacks. It's just a fact. Okay, don't shoot the messenger because that is just a fact. When we think about Islamist attacks, there was San Bernardino, Fort Hood, I guess could be classed as an Islamist attack. That renegade soldier that opened fire a few years back. But the vast majority of Americans die from spree shootings in violent incidents. That is. Um, But the Republicans are right to say that this is a real issue and it needs to be called what it is. Um, One thing that really, really, really irritates me is when some Muslims, and unfortunately it's too many Muslims in my opinion, pretend that there's no connection whatsoever between Islam and terrorism. This, in my view, is utterly disingenuous. It's just plain wrong. Simple as that. It's wrong. To try and suggest that Al Shabaab, the ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, Boko Haram, the Taliban, and so on, that these groups have absolutely no ideological connection to Islam whatsoever is utterly disingenuous. Now, from the point of view of Muslims who say this, it's a defensive thing because they don't want their faith to have a bad image. And from the point of view of non Muslims who say it, frankly, it's spineless political correctness. That's my opinion. You don't address any problem by denying what it is. Now, it's true that many of these people distort what the Quran says. It is true that in many cases they don't even bother reading the Quran. I believe one of the hostages of ISIS actually said that they didn't even have a Quran on them. So, of course, they distort it. much the same way that the Westboro Baptist Church distorts baptism, or the Baptist faith, I should say. But you can't say that the Westboro Baptist Church has zero connection to Christianity, because it does. This is, to me, the arrogance of religion, that this notion that religious people somehow cannot be. I've just seen this point actually in an online forum, and I made the point to the guy. He said no Muslims are terrorists and no terrorists are Muslims, which is utter crap, of course. But I made the point to him, the implication of that statement is that all 1.5 billion Muslims are perfect. That all 1.5 billion Muslims are not capable of terrorism. Now, my message to any Muslim people who are watching this is, if that is your line of thinking, not only is it arrogant, more importantly, it is wrong. It is just plain wrong to suggest that there are no Muslim terrorists. It's wrong. And as any secular society, as any democracy, any society, in fact, that values pluralism of any kind, needs to recognize this reality. Because the problem is not going to be effectively dealt with if we don't recognize what it is. And frankly, I think that political correctness is dangerous. Now, this does not mean endorse collective punishment of all Muslims. And like I said at the start of the video, I will always condemn prejudice and, harassment, that sort of thing. But I don't have much time for Muslims who want to keep their head in the sand, because they're going to play a very big role in this. And pretending that it doesn't exist is not going to help. So I understand that people are upset over Donald Trump's demagoguery sort of language, and it is dangerous, the things he's saying, because he's making a collective. He's tarring all Muslims with the same brush. I mean, he's saying we just need to stop all Muslim immigration until we find out what's happened. Now, unless I'm mistaken, regarding the San Bernardino shootings, only one of them was actually an outsider. The guy, unless I'm mistaken, was an American citizen. So I think this is, you know, knee jerk reaction. Of course, you need to take security precautions. But, Trump seems to be missing the point that a lot of the refugees coming from Syria are fleeing the likes of Daesh. So, it's, to me, his platform in this is based on a reactionary sort of attitude that is going to backfire. And it's just collective punishment. Um, Yeah, so that's all I want to say, really. I'm sick and tired of this line that Islam has no connection with terrorism, Muslims cannot be terrorists. Get real. I mean, if that is your position, you're deluded. And you're either being deliberately disingenuous or you're just ignorant. And if that offends people, I'm sorry, but it has to be said. Um, we have to be honest about this problem. Radical Islamism is a reality. Do you get extremist Christianity? Do you get extremist Hinduism, Buddhism, so on? Of course you do. Every religion has its fanatics, that's true. But there is something unique in Islam that is more globalized than the fanatics in other religions. I mean, I would argue that Christian fanatics tend to be restricted to the United States and some parts of Africa. Um, Hindu fanatics tend to be restricted to India. Buddhist fanatics tend to be restricted to Southeast Asia, and Jewish fanatics to parts of Israel. But Islamic fanaticism is far more widespread than the others. That's just a reality. This can be seen in terror groups around the world. That doesn't mean that all terror groups are Islamic, of course not, but a lot of them are. And this is just a reality. It's just a statement of fact. Um, and I think it's time for some honesty. I mean, the Islamic world right now is going through a schism between Shia and Sunni, and I'm not saying that to be divisive. I hope that Shia and Sunni can find peace. I don't want the schism in Islam because it means a lot of innocent people being killed. But the reality is, Islam is somewhere where Christianity was in the 16th century, when Catholics and Protestants in Europe were burning each other at stake. That's what's happening. It's a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it's innocent people are suffering. Um, The irony about radical Islam, of course, is the vast majority of victims are actually Muslims. So when people say that talking about this is Islamophobic, that's strange because condemning it, you're actually by by that understanding standing up for Muslim victims of Islamism. Um, I just want to see more honesty from. I don't want to say the Muslim community because that's like a them and us sort of thing, but I do see far too many Muslims getting defensive and not enough Muslims simply recognizing that this is reality. Not talking about everyone. There are Muslims who know this is a problem and they're trying to do something about it. But the truth is, there's far too many Muslims that are defensive about this. Um, I would make an analogy actually when the Catholic abuse scandal was going on. There were far too many Catholics being defensive of the church and trying to make excuses for it. Not everyone, far many, far too many people were. It's a little bit like nationalism. People, when it comes to nationalism, people are naturally defensive of their country. When it comes to religion, people are naturally defensive of the religion. The only thing that matters is truth. And if you really care so much about your religion, then you would recognize its faults and you would be honest about that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there because this is going to take forever to upload, but I think it's important to say we face a very, very serious situation in the world today. And, you can blame foreign policy as much as you want, but that doesn't change the reality on the ground, which is that radical Islam is fact. It just is. And we have to recognize this fact. Everyone has to recognize it. And another thing, public figures shouldn't be afraid to speak out. I'm not talking about the Donald Trump approach of collectively attacking all Muslims, but you have to be honest about this problem.